Let's have a little chat, shall we, on the early morning? A little occult chat. This is your host, The Occult View. Here lately, as you all know, I've been talking a lot about Dynasty, the nighttime soap opera that dominated the 1980s. And usually, when I am particularly drawn to something, it's because my spirit is trying to get me to see something. You get what I'm saying? It's not necessarily about good or bad. It's just what it is. It's just embracing and accepting whatever that may be. And Dynasty, as I told you all before, was a major nighttime drama for those people who are younger. It was a major nighttime drama that dominated the 1980s. It dominated the TV. It dominated the entertainment world. I mean, Dynasty was a groundbreaking show on so many different levels. And it was the Carringtons versus the Colbys, and they were in the oil business. And I've really been drawn back to looking at old episodes of Dynasty because you can look at them now on Amazon Prime. And, I'm seeing things now that I did not see then because I'm an occultist. And I can see the occultism and the spirits or the demons that were attached to that show. And it's not about, let me be clear, because a lot of times when people hear the word demon, especially if you're a Christian, and I'm hoping ain't no Christians watching me, okay? If you are, too motherfucking bad. But when people hear the word demon, they automatically become afraid. But it's really not what people think. It's not what they think. It's really not. Because all demonic energy is not necessarily bad. You get what I'm saying? It all depends on your intentions. And it all depends on what demonic energy you're trying to tap into and what you are using it for. You get what I'm saying? So when I say demon, try to just stay with me. Because I know a lot of people really don't understand demonology and stuff the way that I do. But you get what I'm saying. When I go back to the 1980s was a very, very dark, demonic time. When you really look at a lot of the things that took place in that era, for those of us who lived through it, whether you were younger or not, we were all affected by the 1980s. The same thing with the 1960s. People will say the same thing about the 60s. The 60s was a very demonic time, but it was different demonic energies. This is a very demonic, well, this time that we're living in now, I don't know what type of demon they're using or working with now, but it'll eventually come around. You feel what I'm saying? But going back to Dynasty, I'm studying it. I'm studying the episodes, studying the energy of Dynasty. And I want to loop back around to the character of Claudia Blaisdell because her character was an integral part of the show for a long time. And the death of her character was very symbolic. And not just for Dynasty, but just for the culture in general. Because what that really signified was that they were trying to get rid of a certain type of person. Claudia was a working class type of person until she married into the Carrington family. Then, of course, she benefited a little bit from their wealth and their power and everything too. But as I told you before, they began to turn on her. And the way it was written, it made it look like Claudia was crazy. But Claudia wasn't crazy. So what I'm saying is this. The 1980s was a period of a lot of gaslighting and a lot of demonic energies. Even if we go back to Poltergeist, because a lot of bad things happen to the people who participated in the making of Poltergeist. That is why Joe Beth Williams and what is his name, Craig T. Nelson, that is why they did not come back for Poltergeist 3. And the same thing with Dynasty. A lot of fucked up shit happened to a lot of the people that participated in Dynasty. You know what I'm saying? Either their careers ended abruptly and you never heard from them again, or something, drastic happened to them. But when we really look at Dynasty and the dynamics of the show, peeling back the layers and looking at it from a spiritual standpoint, rather, Dynasty was about greed, self-destruction, gluttony, and I don't mean gluttony as far as eating per se, but you can say that because when Alexis used to when she was served lunch a lot of times, overindulgence, when she was served lunch and it was just her in her office, she would have 2 Cornish hens and lobster and steak. All of that's demonic when you really look at it. All of that was demonic in nature. It fell under gluttony, overindulgence, greed. And not only that, Dynasty, low key, well, not really low key, but what they snuck in on us, covertly, was incest. Because are we supposed to ignore the fact that the characters of Jeff Colby and Fallon Carrington, they were second cousins? Because Jeff's mother, Francesca, was first cousins with Alexis Carrington. Alexis Morel, Carrington. Fallon was Alexis's daughter. And Jeff and Fallon, they ended up getting married. They had a whole love affair. So I guess you can look at that as the Isis and Osirian energy in a way, right? Because they were more like brother and sister because they grew up together. And what's so interesting is Dynasty was on the air for damn near a decade. And this was the type of energy that was being pushed out into the culture, into the world, into the universe for damn near a decade. Greed, gluttony, self-destruction. And Dynasty was a goddamn blockbuster hit. It just makes you wonder what type of demons did they, did that cast and the people that made that show, what type of demon or what type of entities did they make deals with to get to where they were at? The only one who has not had anything bad really happen to her, truthfully, is Joan Collins, who played Alexis. And I can't really say that because she's had some things happen to her too. But see, Joan Collins is smart enough to keep her mouth shut. That is why she's 90 years old in this business, and she ain't had no freak accidents and no weird shit happen to her. You know what I mean? So that's very, that's very interesting. She's still around. Heather Locklear, she went crazy. Heather Locklear went crazy. Heather Locklear, she went crazy. A lot of the other cast members, uh, Claudia, the girl that played Claudia, I talked about, Pamela Bellwood, you don't hear too much from her anymore. The girl that played Kirby, her name was Pamela too. I think her name was no, her name was Kathleen Beller. You don't hear about her anymore. The original Fallon, Pamela Sue Martin, a lot of not so good thing. I think she went through some things too with her health. And I know what people are going to say. Well, things like that happen, but yeah, but we're talking about this industry, and we're talking about the things that they were dabbling into for wealth and prosperity. You know what I'm saying? Diane Carroll, after she left the show, if I'm not mistaken, not long after she left the show, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that was very, very out of how can I put it? That was just out of the ordinary for her, since she was an organic eater. She ate organic food. She took care of herself for the most part. And even she said in interviews that she was shocked that she ended up with breast cancer, and that ended up claiming her life in 2019. It went away, and then it came back 20 some years later when she was in her 80s, or maybe it never left. That's very interesting. Linda Evans, she started having issues too. The lady that played Crystal Carrington. So look at the pattern. I'm just, I'm an occultist, so I like looking at the patterns. Linda Evans, she started messing around with that dude Yanni. I think he's a musician of some sort, Yanni. She started messing with him, but then Linda Evans started going kind of, she started having issues as well. I'm not going to, maybe I shouldn't say she went kind of crazy, but I think she started having health issues. And she started indulging a little bit, and I think taking pills and stuff like that. And we all know what happened to Heather Locklear. We still don't really understand what happened to Heather Locklear. She's still around, but she kind of went off the deep end. So what did they really deal with to make that show a success the way that it did, the way that they did? You know what I'm saying? Now, I went back and I looked at that scene where Claudia Blaisdell died in that fire and in Dynasty. And as I was looking at that scene and as I was looking at the room fill up with flames, I felt such a presence of dread and such a presence of just hopelessness and just, depression and oppression and regret and guilt. I felt that not from me, but in that scene. See, they use those real energies in that scene. They make them pull on those types of frequencies in those scenes. See, what we think is art is really real life. You get what I'm saying? And this type of energy was being pushed out into the universe for damn near a decade. So as I'm looking at the scene, I said, well, you know what? Claudia, in actuality, Claudia, not only was she the sacrifice, but she was also their, I'm going to be layman when I say this, she was also their karma. Let's just say that, their karma. Because she burned down their hotel, the La Mirage. Whether it was inadvertently or not, Claudia was a fire starter. Claudia was really a witch. That's what they were trying to tell us symbolically. Like I told you, Claudia was the one who was the real motherfucking power source on that show, because she knew everything about those Carringtons. She knew everything about them. And how that relates to real life is that people that know, people that may not be as rich, but who know where the skeletons are, who know where all the bodies are buried, and I mean symbolically, not necessarily literally, but people who have that type of knowledge and power, they were in a process of getting rid of those types of people in the 1980s. And they were showing us that in shows like Dynasty. They were showing us the greed. They were showing us the depravity. Like I said, let me repeat this. Are we supposed to ignore that Jeff and Fallon were cousins that had children together? But then again, they were showing us how a lot of these elitist, rich families get down. And not just the white ones. Let's get off this race shit. Not just the white ones. See, that's where we get blinded. We think it's just the white ones. No, 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 no. There are black elite families too. May not be a lot of them that are in the limelight, but they exist. They exist. You know what I find interesting? That in the Dynasty reboot that they did a few years ago, it just ended last year, I think. The Dynasty reboot that they did, the Colby family, which was a white family, ended up being a black family. And Jeff Colby ended up being a black man in the reboot. Because you know they did a reboot to the original Dynasty. The original Dynasty came out in 81 and lasted until 89. It was a damn good motherfucking show, but I'm just pointing out how it imitates life and how it can interact with life because they're pushing that energy out into the universe. And then when we go back to the character of Stephen, the down low gay son, he was marrying women. Let's really look at this. You know when Claudia really started to go off the deep end, the character of Claudia, she really started to go off the deep end when she married Stephen. She sacrificed herself, her womanhood, her dignity, her respect, to marry a gay man who would never love her. And after she did that, that is when she started to go a little cuckoo, the character of Claudia. She started to go crazy, or what people would call crazy. But could it be that she was picking up those off-balance frequencies that she shouldn't have been picking up in the first place, because Stephen shouldn't have been messing around with her and she shouldn't have been messing around with him because he was a gay man? He should have just went ahead and got with a damn man and been gay instead of messing with her. And this happens to women in real life, with men who mess around with other men, and then they bring that energy back to the woman, and then that causes an imbalance within the woman. But we don't talk about that, right? I know what y'all saying, but you a gay male, how could you talk about this? Because I'm cut from a different motherfucking cloth. I'm cut from a different motherfucking cloth. They broke the mold. When the universe made me, they broke the motherfucking mold, okay? So I can talk about things even though I may be a gay person. And it may not show me and show gay people in a favorable light, but we're all human having a human experience. And we have to stop pretending like we're all perfect, or like we don't make mistakes, or that we don't have flaws. We are human beings. Everyone has flaws. The problem is that You have people who pretend that their flaws, here we go. We have people that pretend that their flaws are non-existent. And what they will do is they will focus on another person's flaws to try to hide their own. Isn't that what they did on Dynasty? Isn't that what the Carringtons did all along? And the Colbys? They focused on everyone else's flaws, but they never focused on their own. They didn't focus on the fact that Jeff and Fallon were cousins, having children. See, what's the word? What's the word I'm looking for? The subcontext or the covert message was the dysfunction within the Carrington and Colby families was due to inbreeding. Because what they didn't tell us was that the Colbys and the Carringtons were actually related. But they didn't tell us that. How about that? They didn't tell us that the Carringtons and the Colbys were actually related. We had to figure it out for ourselves. You had to look at it from a spiritual standpoint. You had to understand that demonology from a spiritual standpoint. That's why Alexis did not want that. Alexis, she loved Jeff. She loved Jeff Colby. She loved Jeff Colby. That is why she did not want Kirby, the butler's daughter, marrying her son Adam. She didn't want that. She didn't want that. But they were okay with Jeff and Fallon marrying each other. They were okay with that because they were related. And that kept the bloodline the way that they wanted it to. And it kept the money in the family. And then they brought in Diane Carroll as Dominique Devereaux. Dynasty was showing you the Illuminati before YouTube told us about the Illuminati. They were showing us the Illuminati before we even knew what the Illuminati was. This was prior to YouTube, decades before YouTube. About 25 years before YouTube. They were showing us the Illuminati or the so-called Illuminati and how they got down in these elitist families, allegedly. Let me say it that way. But that was being pushed out into the universe. The 80s, and you know what, if you really go back to the 80s and even going back to Dynasty again, the 80s was a time of great greed and gluttony. A lot of the billionaires now that are probably in their 70s now, they made a lot of their money during the 80s. Because back in the 80s, there was a lot of shit that Ronald Reagan did that made it more difficult for your average person. I remember hearing elders talk about that all the time. How Ronald Reagan made things so much more difficult for your average person. There were tax breaks and all types of things that people used to could get, from what I understand, or were eligible for rather, that he put a stop to put more money in the pockets of rich people. You know what I'm saying? And I'm going to be honest with you, right now, I feel like they're trying to take us back to the 1980s again. And I think that's what Spirit is trying to show me. And truth be told, I know I joke sometimes with some of my friends about the 1980s who are younger than me, but I don't want to go back to the 1980s. I don't want to go back to that time period. That was not a good time period for me. I am happy right here in 2023. Now, I wouldn't mind going back to the late 90s or something like that. But the 80s, especially the late 80s, they were not very good. And that was not a very good time period for black people in general, especially here in the Washington, D.C. area. That was at the height of the crack epidemic. So when we really look at Dynasty and look at everything it represented, Dynasty represented gluttony. Say it again, it represented gluttony, overindulgence, greed, murder, incest, drug addiction, homosexuality, DL tendencies, deception, murder, genocide. Dynasty represented all of that bullshit. Governments overthrowing their own government. So when I really go back and look at, and just re-examine it, Dynasty was a very demonic show. It had a lot of demonic elements to it. Gluttony, overindulgence, murder, families backstabbing each other, incest in families, deception, greed. I'm going to keep saying the same thing over and over because I want people to understand what I'm saying. And then it ties into the time period that we were in at that time. And what did the 1980s deal with? Overindulgence, greed, murder, genocide, drug addiction, the crack epidemic, black on black crime and murder, gaslighting, putting people in mental institutions that did not belong there, drug dealing. That's when them drug dealers was making a lot of money back then. Communities being tore down. The middleman, the average woman in America and in the world, because Dynasty influenced the world. That show was worldwide. It even surpassed Dallas. And that was because it served an agenda. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I just thought I would come on here and just talk a little bit because I couldn't sleep and just give a little bit more insight into the demon of, Dynasty. Not saying it was bad, not saying it was good, not saying that it should, but I'm just saying what it is. Just saying what it was and what it is, at least from my perception. How I see it now. And then let's not forget that two of the main characters on there, they were living with AIDS and didn't even tell anybody. That's another thing. The AIDS epidemic at that time. Michael Nader and Rock Hudson. Both of them had AIDS. Michael Nader, he never admitted to it. His daughter actually admitted to it after he died. The one who played Dexter, or Dex. Whatever his name was, Dexter. No, Dexter. He also played Dimitri on All My Children. What else has been going on? What else has been going on? Let me think. Did y'all see that fake fight between Marlo and Candy? You know what? I don't even want to talk about that bullshit because the Real Housewives of Atlanta, that shit has gone downhill. But that I guess that's the dynasty of the 2000s, right? Or the 21st century, right? They tell us it's reality, but it's really fake. And what they tell us is really what they tell us is really fake is really reality. So reality TV is really the fake shit. See, they don't show us real anymore. See, shows like Dynasty, they were real. That was the real shit. They were showing us real shit. That was the real reality TV right there. Because in case you all didn't know, Linda Evans, who played Crystal, and Joan Collins, who played Alexis, they really hated each other in real life. They really hated each other in real life. They didn't like each other. So they took off all of the real shows and replaced it with so-called reality TV, but reality TV is really the fake. That's really showing you the fake because let me tell you something. Most of those women on reality TV, they are not all that. Most of those people on reality TV, they're not all that. They don't have all what they claim to have. And most of that shit is orchestrated. Oh, and Joan Collins and John Forsythe, who played Blake Carrington, her ex-husband, they didn't like each other in real life either. They didn't like each other in real life either. See? That was real. The beef between them was real. He did not like Joan Collins because he felt like this English woman was taking the spotlight away from these Americans on this show. But I hate to tell y'all this, that English woman, she saved Dynasty because Dynasty was fucking boring. Dynasty was fucking boring before Joan Collins came on and played Alexis. It was boring. Very boring. But I just wanted to come through. There's nothing else I can really think to talk about. But I just wanted to come through and just talk more about just the energy and the frequencies of Dynasty and how that influenced culture. It influenced culture, and whether people want to believe it or accept it or not, it did. It influenced culture. It influenced relationships between women and men. It influenced a lot of stuff, whether people want to accept it or not. I'm not saying that it influenced you all, but I'm just saying in general. Dynasty is still very popular because it was a good show. It was a good motherfucking show. But at what cost? And what was the real agenda? What was really being put out into the universe? Anyway, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.